My name is James B. Webb, and today is July the 19th, 2004. I'm in Milan, Tennessee to interview W. Jerry Flippin. This interview is taking place as part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Your full name, please.
William Jerry Flippin.
And when were you born?
October 21st, 1927.
And where were you born?
I was born in Milan, Tennessee. We didn't have any hospitals over here. They had a little clinic in Jackson, but I was born in the home of my grandmother, Stewart.
Not on the kitchen table?
Oh, no, I'm sure not. But, yeah, that's where it was. And old Dr. Harper delivered me, and he was a great family friend.
Okay. Going to ask about your family. Tell us a little about your grandparents.
Well, on my mother's side, I've already mentioned that's the home in which I was born. That was Tom Stewart, Thomas Houston Stewart, and she was Rose Horton Stewart. Wonderful people. I am the one that's making that statement. And their home was the first house on the north side of the business district being only 2 blocks. And my paternal grandparents were William McAdoo Flippin and his wife Lilla Flippin, and they were the first house on the south side of the business district. So I was just going often from house to house, and had grandfather Flippin died the night he helped name me. I didn't have but one name for a while.
So you literally grew up on Main Street, I guess?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Had a livery stable and all those sort of things?
Right behind the house was a red barn, and that's where you used to keep the surrey and the horse, and later on they put an automobile in there. And that home, I might also add, was the home of my grandmother Flippin's mother. I lived in that home for 10 years, and I had 4 women raising me. It was my own mother, of course, and grandmother Flippin, and then great-grandmother Fields, and the house revolved around her. And then Aunt Laverne Partee had not married yet, and I was the first child of that generation. I was the first grandson for both houses.
Okay.
And it turned out to be, I guess, to my advantage, because I got a lot of attention.
Tell us about your parents, their names, and where they were born and when.
And my father was Gerald son of Flippin, and he was born in 1906 right here in Milan, and my mother was Kate Stewart, and she was born 2 years later in 1908.
Tell us about their lives, their business, their community activities.
Well, my daddy was a young man, 22 years old, I believe, when his father died. And he took over the family business, which was farmland, cotton gin, drugstore, interest center, furniture store, and things like that. And so he kind of specialized over the years. He sold the drugstore. It still keeps the name till this day. But he ended up spending most of his time at Flippin Gin Company and then operating a farm, raising mostly cotton, but he bought all kind of agricultural products. Mother never did work out. They used to call it public work. She was just a full-time mother and was one of my supporters in everything I did. If it was the football team needed equipment, well, she helped raise the money, and she was just always wanting to help out in the community.
Your father had a famous roommate at UT, didn't he?
Oh, yes. That was Dr. Andy Holt, that later became Commissioner of Education in Tennessee, President of the University of Tennessee, President of the National Education Association, And my grandfather Flippin and Andy Holt's father, Andrew Holt, had to do something with those boys. Now, both men got married kind of late in life, and they got their heads together, and they sent Andy and my daddy down to Atlanta to Emory, and they were roommates at Emory University. Later on, Daddy never did explain it to me to my satisfaction. I don't think he cut the mustard down there at Emory, and he ended up at University of Tennessee. Andy stayed on down at Emory, but then went to Columbia and other places and ended up with a PhD. But that's Dad's, I guess, his claim to fame is he was a roommate of Andy Holt, probably the most popular man ever lived in Tennessee.
And you have a younger sister?
Yes, I have a younger sister, Carolyn Houston. She's Tate now. She married a local boy, and they live up in Brentwood.
Okay. About your childhood, you grew up during the Depression, is that right?
I sure did. And I remember it so well because it was the chief topic of conversation around the dinner table. Now, the Depression hit down here real hard. We didn't have any jobs here to speak of to start with, and crop prices were cheap as they could be, and everybody helped out everybody else. And my great-grandmother, but by the way, she didn't pass away till she was 99. It's going to be 100 on George Washington's birthday, and she died Christmas. She saved, and I've been accused of that rubbing off on me. If they delivered groceries, and back then the grocery stores delivered groceries to the house, you ordered on the telephone. And they always put a paper sack and it took some string. It came from the ceiling. And they take that string and do like that on a sack. Every sack, it was tied up. And they tied the chicken legs together too, because you order chicken, it wasn't frozen from Tyson. It was live as it could be. Anyway, she'd take those string and tie it on to another string that she already had, and she kept a ball as big as a basketball in the cedar chest down at the foot of her bed. She ironed out all the paper sacks, and when they cooked, they got the good out of everything. Yes, I was born in the Depression, and I'm glad that I was. It put some habits in me that I carried to this good day, because everyone was frugal, and everyone kept in mind at all times when the money gonna run out.
You were 14 years old in 1941. Do you remember where you were that Sunday morning, December the 7th?
I think about where I was. I was home, and it came over the radio about Pearl Harbor, and we were all shocked about it. And I was up at our home, and we had one of those radios that you find them in the antique stores now, but we all got down around it and listened to it, and yes, very well.
Well, how did the World War II affect a 14-year-old?
Well, it wasn't very long until, of course, everything was rationed. A sugar ration, gasoline ration, ration meat, shoes. You had to have a ration stamped to buy a pair of shoes. And we all just, everybody helped out everybody else. And we were fortunate that we had a farm with a whole lot of tenants on it. And every one of them had gardens, and they had chickens and hogs and everything else. And so we didn't suffer, if you want to use that word, for some things that other folks did.
Well, in 1943, the football team ran out of gas, didn't they? Literally.
In 1943, I was along with the other guys. We won the first championship Milan high school football ever won. And I get, it was no good news. So the Japanese had run us all the way down to, you might say, Australia and parts of New Guinea. Hitler had run wild all over Europe, and things looked bleak. But we had a football team here that won. And that year, gasoline was so rationed that we had to play two teams twice. One of them was Humboldt, and that was our chief rival. The other one, it was Trenton. That was our other chief rival. And we had to play them twice in the same year because we didn't have enough gasoline to get to out-of-town games. And we beat them both twice. And I've often said that was some of the high water mark in my life, and I kind of wanted that on my tombstone if there's room for it.
Tell us about your schooling, your teachers, your classes.
Well, the school system in Milan was pretty good, but I was not a good student. I didn't want to I wanted to get by, and I kind of felt my mother and daddy both gone to the school up here, and my grandmother had taught school, and I just kind of figured I'd get by somewhat on that. And I didn't apply myself very well. And we had Miss Vinnie Walker and Miss Nola Cannon. They were good teachers. Aunt Claude Denny, my grandmother's sister. Miss Johnny Hale, for whom our football stadium is named for. She was such a supporter of football and basketball. They named a football field for her.
For the Latin teacher.
Pardon?
For the Latin teacher, wasn't she?
She was a Latin teacher, and I had a terrible time in Latin. I don't think I can say many words now. The Latin I learned in law school. But anyway, when I got up to be about the 12th grade, my parents realized that my academic background looked pretty poor, and I did too. And of course, the war was going on, and we're all preparing to go into service. So they sent me, and I wasn't shipped, so to speak. I was glad to go. I went to Columbia Military Academy up in Columbia, Tennessee, and that was a real turning point in my life. I wouldn't be sitting here right now but for CMA. They taught me how to study. They taught me how to concentrate. They taught me that when you think you couldn't learn something, I used to turn something loose like a hot horseshoe if I couldn't pick it up pretty quickly. But up there, you just kept grinding. At night, you got under a blanket with a flashlight or whatever it took and just taxed your brain. And permit me to say this, that I was the most improved student. I had that recognition, and I graduated in the Scholarship Society, and there were only 2 students in the senior class that were only there 1 year that graduated in the Scholarship Society, and that got me going. And I could do college work then, and I wasn't afraid of the books, and I wasn't afraid. But for that, I was in trouble.
What happened the day that, you and your friend Johnny Caruth, the day you turned, was it 17 or 18? What'd you do?
Well, we were 18, and they kept messing around with us with the draft board. And we got in a conversation. We couldn't make a plan. They said, well, I don't need you this week. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean next week, or does that mean 6 weeks, or what? So without saying a word in the world to his parents, he didn't, and I didn't say a word to mine. We just went down to the post office and joined the Army.
And when? What month and year?
That was 1900 and at the end of 45, 46.
All right. And did you wind up seeing the Orient?
Yeah, well, I got a free cruise after about 6 weeks of basic training over in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and yes, we did, and yeah, we did, and it was. I was glad we did it. I learned a lot.
Did some experience that you had while in the service of your country in the Army have something to do with your career choice?
I look back over it, over things, and it surely did. We went into Japan and occupied the country Made sure all the arms were surrendered and so forth, and hostile groups were located, and went down to a town called Nara, Japan, but not too far from Osaka. And what was left of it, though, spent a little time in Osaka, which was totally devastated. It was a sized town in Chicago, and it was an industrial center, and it was flattened. Anyway, the American troops, just like to have everywhere we've ever have been, they got to fraternizing with the natives, and that's, unfortunately, that's a history of the armed forces. And we had a court-martial situation to stop that, and we didn't want any public display of private affection. Now, that's a pretty catchy word. Well, in high school, I had learned how to type because we had a young typing teacher, pretty good-looking thing, and it attracted the boys. And we had a lot of boys in the typing class, and I got pretty good at it. I could, now's the time for all good men to come to their country, and I could whip that out. And next thing you know, I was typing 45 words a minute after the corrections. I kept that talent. I have it this day, thank God, because I didn't have a secretary for a long time when I was practicing law. So they asked me if I'd help in the court-martialing, and I'd write up the charge sheets, what they'd done.
Well, give an example of what a soldier might be charged with doing.
Well, to start off with, it was public display of private affection. Now, that was the charge. But of course, if you didn't nip that in the bud, it could go further. And now all of that was strictly against military law, and we would have a court-martial, and there was a captain over there. And I was in the field artillery, and Captain Gillette, I'll never forget him, he's a red-headed fellow out of Alabama, and didn't have the Judge Advocates Corps. If they had it, I never saw any evidence of it. And so the defense would come from another officer, and I would talk to Captain Gillette, and he would do the best he could to defend. I look back now, I think he lost every case, but he gave him a defense. Maybe that had something to do with my wanting to see that maybe give folks a little better, a little fair shot at trying to escape something they're charged with when it didn't amount to much.
So when did you return to the States, and how was your return?
Well, we came home in 1948. Unlike, it breaks my heart when I'd see these boys coming home from Vietnam, and the nation was so divided, and they were spat upon, cursed. It's awful. And they'd done nothing but just what the country asked them to do. And when we got off the troop ship out in California, the band played. There's a a lot of hugging, and some of the wives on the West Coast met the boat, and sweethearts, and it was a fine welcome. There's a lot of patriotism in the country. The country was united, and so I got on about in 1948, and time to get on to school.
And school, tell us about college.
Well, I was crazy about my only grandfather, Tom Stewart, and he was down to Memphis, and Methodist Hospital down there was a cancer situation, and he was very, very critical. And I knew wherever I went to school that I would definitely want to come and visit with him on the weekends, because he was special to me. Spent as much time in his home almost as I did in my own. So I was going down to visit him in the hospital, and I went by what's Rhodes College now, then was Southwestern, and it's right close in, so I enrolled there for my pre-law. Enjoyed it very much. Fine school.
Any experiences about college that you want to tell us about?
Oh, I had a good time like everybody else, and I had that leg up from CMA. It was very helpful to me still. And I was on the football team down there, and one of my teammates was Ray Ashley, later became an attorney general. He was another lawyer. And we were good close friends, and I got that behind me. And I never did want to take foreign language. I couldn't learn it. I didn't learn 5 words of Japanese and over a year in the middle of them. And I didn't want to take foreign language, and I couldn't stand the thought of chemistry. And somehow or another, I found out that Vanderbilt was, and other law schools, they opened up a little window where they would take us in as veterans, and they gave us a year of pre-law based on military service. And I've thought and thought lately about where did I learn that? I can't quite remember, but I applied and was accepted, and I was fortunate.
And about law school.
By the way, I went to school in the summertime. We were kind of behind, and so I went to school in the summertime. I took to get some more hours that I had to have. All right,
Okay.
sir.
And about law school, we've discussed your interest in the law, but as a child growing up, did you know any lawyers?
Really, I just knew of lawyers. There was a few lawyers would come to Milan, and since it was not a courthouse town, and they'd leave, and they'd stay a while, and all of the good law practice went to Trenton, where the courthouse was, or Humboldt. We have a courthouse in both those towns in the county, or to Jackson for that matter. And it was, I really didn't know, but I hear my daddy talk about Mr. Ed Smith, that people had nightmares over being in the witness chair with him cross-examining them. I've heard him say that. They were scared to death of him.
And how did you make your choice of law school?
Of law schools?
Yes, sir.
Well, I had written off to Washington and Lee, and I was interested perhaps going there. But let me stop and say this, that I really didn't envision that I'd practice law. I wanted a law education for the business part of it. I really wanted to go into cotton business. That had always been on my mind. I'd always worked at the cotton gin and on the farm for that. And I've been around cotton. And while I was waiting to get in Southwestern till the next semester, I went to the cotton school, went to the Murdoch International Cotton School. And
Is that on Front Street?
off of Front Street, right across the street from Ed Crump's office when he was in power. I used to watch Mr. Crump come to work every morning and park his car with a special parking place right in front of the fire department.
Do you know cotton grades?
Pardon, sir?
Do you know cotton grades?
I sure do.
Do you know strict, low, Midland?
Right, sir. I passed the government cotton classing examination, and I could get licensed at that time as a government cotton classer. You say strict, low, Midland, strict, good, ordinary, all that, and we learned to do that. We classed 1,000 bales of cotton a day. Wasn't at all unusual for us to do that. Just pick it up and look at it and call it like that and pull the staple with our hands. That's the way it was done.
So your idea was to go to law school to learn to help you in the cotton business.
That's correct, sir.
All right, sir. Well, tell us about the law school you chose, Vanderbilt Law School,
That's right.
particularly about some of your professors.
Well, I really like all my professors. I will never get over what a great teacher John Wade was. He taught torts. He was a modern day prosser on torts. And then we had Merton Ferson, and he taught contracts and agency. And then we had Professor Hartman, great teacher in agency and commercial paper. They were great teachers, great men, and all. And we had a lot of camaraderie. The Dean Wade had gotten out of the Marine Corps, and Hartman had gotten out of the Navy, and Hartman was still single, and we'd have softball games and a little party afterwards, and he partied with us everywhere we went. And we had a fine faculty. I enjoyed law school.
All right. Any other law school memories you want to share with us?
Well, I have to say this. I told you that I didn't know any lawyers here in Milan. No one ever motivated me to practice law. The first real spark that actually came after that court-martialing situation in Japan was I kept up with the national newspapers and a case of State versus Ferguson. And let me give you a little background, because the background is important. Jack Norman was kind of head of the trial bar at that time, I'd say, the most visible name. And he'd come out to the school and speak occasionally. He was a criminal lawyer, mostly. And the guy who prosecuted opposite him so often was Ben West, who was an assistant attorney general. Ben West, with supporters making overtures, to go run for mayor of Nashville. They might have had something to do with that. Jack Norman didn't like Ben West, and vice versa. So Ben West resigned as assistant attorney general, and he agreed to defend Ferguson in a murder case. And a headline was screaming all over in the papers about it. And Jack Norman saw the opportunity, I think that he did, that he was going to make sure Ben West didn't win that lawsuit. So he signed on some way or another a special prosecutor. That's the only time in his life probably ever did it. Well, more the papers played it up, and we were allowed 3 cuts per class. I understand some colleges now, you don't even have to go to class as long as you pass the exam, but it wasn't that way then. I took all my cuts, and I went downtown and sat on the front row of that trial. And it's never been anything like it in the world. They were after each other, tooth and toenail, because it had something to do with Ben West getting good publicity and in the newspaper every day, and then the write-ups later, a big boost for winning as mayor. And of course, Jack Norman had already made his name. And I'll never forget that trial. I can visualize almost every day of it. And that really was the first unction, let's call it, that I ever had that, you know, I'd like to do that. I watched that trial. Incidentally, Ben West won that trial and became mayor of Nashville. Yeah, Jack Norman, he made a dramatic final argument and ran back and forth across the courtroom on squatting down and running on his toes. I don't know how he kept his balance. He was talking about the little pitter-patter of the feet of the ghost of the man that Ferguson had killed. And man, he had the whole courtroom holding their breath. But old Ben West got up and walked around and just moaning and groaning and wouldn't say a word and just let the atmosphere sink in. And then he looked over to the jury and said, "I ain't gonna tell you no ghost stories like Jack just did." And everybody just could once again breathe. It was dramatic. It was dramatic.
To travel from Memphis to Nashville, back in those days, you didn't have a choice of an interstate, so you rode through the little towns. Is that right?
Oh yes, sir.
Every one of them. Did you have a a fellow commuter that later made a federal judge?
Oh, I know what you're talking about. The way it was then, you could take the bar exam before you graduated. So when you graduated, you practiced law. And you're talking about Harry Welford. Harry Welford, of course, lived down to Memphis, and I had a car at school. It was an A model Ford, 1932 model. It was, something got wrong with it that weekend. I was coming home, so I caught a ride with Harry Welford and Art Shea. They were 2 grades ahead of me. And they came right through Milan. Well, just before we got to Milan, we came to Atwood, Tennessee, and there's a Y in the road up there. And there was a speed trap. And everybody knew it was. I knew it was. But I didn't say anything. Harry didn't think to. Well, he pulled up to the Y intersection, and Zach Bryant was magistrate up there, and his brother Josephus Bryant was a constable. And they'd see to it ever so often that they put that stop sign up on one side of the Y and put it over in another one. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't have a post hole digger themselves. Anyway, Harry pulled up to the stop sign. And everybody did that in his days. You didn't come to a total stop if nothing was coming. You look right and you look left. Well, very few cars, if any, had automatic transmission. You had the gear shift. And you'd take second. That was the word for it. You'd just go real slow and put it in second gear and just go on through. Well, Harry came up there and he took second and went on through the intersection. And we got out there on the other side of Atwood toward Milan, and I heard a little noise going like a siren, but real low. And this car pulled up right beside us. I looked over there, and Harry paid no attention to it. I think he had a bicycle siren that used to run on a bicycle tire. I think he put it on his fan belt. I thought his water pump needed greasing. But he pulled out a pistol and aimed that pistol right at Harry. Well, of course, that got his attention. He pulled over on the side of the road. He says, "You didn't stop back there at stop sign." Harry said, "Well, I want a thing coming with a mile to see both ways." And said, I don't know if I came to a total stop, but I was just barely moving." He said, "You come with me." Well, they went down out of this house where his brother lived. That was Zach. He was the high magistrate of the south end of Carroll County. Went in there and they had a card table set up in the middle of the living room. I can see it right now. All the court records in a King Edward cigar box or two, where he made change. And there Harry was, and he had his law license on the front seat of the car. I do remember he had it in a manila envelope. So this had to be his first case. He hadn't even gotten home with his license. Well, he got in there and made an eloquent talk about what the safety laws were for the safety of the people who traverse the highways. And he said, "I looked to the right and I looked to the left, and nothing was coming." He said, "It's true that I didn't come to a total stop. I took second gear." He said, "What's the difference, may y'all please, between coming to a stop and taking second gear?" Old Magistrate Bryant said, $18.75. Well, and Harry fussed and carried on, but he paid the fine. He went down to Memphis, and he had an uncle down there, Millsap's Fish Shoes, I believe it was I think, U.S. attorney. Then he went to the commercial appeal, and they ran editorials about it. Now, I tell you what Harry did. I think he had something to do with getting rid of the stop, of the speed trap. Several years later, a number of years later, Harry called me on the phone and said, "I guess you heard I've been going to be nominated for United States District Judge." And I said, "Yeah, I read about it in the paper. Congratulations." He said, "Well, I've got to have a hearing in Washington." And said, "I'd like for you to come up and testify before the for me before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Well, when I was talking, I kind of thumbed through, I always kept the appointment book around, and I really did have a reason I couldn't go, but I didn't tell him that reason. I said, I don't think you want me up there. He said, well, why? I said, well, in the first place, I said, I never have had a case with you. And I never have, I've heard about you, but I never have seen you in action down in Memphis. I said, the only experience that I can testify about is what happened in Atwood, Tennessee. And I said, you couldn't win a stop sign case in a speed trap in Atwood. I said, I don't think that testimony is going to help you be confirmed. He let me off the hook. He had to come back to that.
Tell us about your law school curriculum. Did it teach you the practicalities of making a living with the law, or did it teach you theory?
I would have to say that we suffered in law school because we did not have any clinics. This day and time, I understand the students get really involved. They started that just as I was getting about ready to graduate. But I never did anything from a practical standpoint of working on a lawsuit, sitting beside some licensed attorney, being a clerk. I did work part of most of one summer in a local law firm here in Milan. But other than that, I had no real experience.
Now, you graduated from Vanderbilt Law School in what year?
52.
But you began practice in 54, is that right?
That's correct, sir.
Tell us about your first day in the office.
Well, I had a bout with my wife. No, let me rephrase that. No bout. I don't know why I put it that way. She thought she married a lawyer. And I was courting her in law school. She was a Nashville girl. And I came home with to work with my daddy. And I had an option on cotton gin in Alamo, Tennessee. And even though I still had it in the kind of back of my mind since State versus Ferguson, I put in a cotton crop. And then I started putting in another one. And an allotment came on in cotton trade. That changed it. And she finally told me, she said, I want to ask you to do something for yourself. And me too. She said, I think you'd make a good lawyer. And said, this business you in now, you're coming in at 2 o'clock in the morning. Cotton gin's running night and day during the season. Says, sometimes don't get your clothes off and go back to work. And said, if you try to practice law for 1 year, and if you don't like it, if you don't make it, it'll be over with, and you'll never hear another word from me about it. So when you start talking about the first day in the office, that brings that to mind. So I had some office furniture and a $65 used Royal typewriter, and I went down over the picture show in Milan, and I rented one room, $25 a month. And I shared a reception room with Mr. Stacks, Alvin Stacks, real estate business. And I went down there half-heartedly in a way, but I was going to give it a shot. But I guess I was going to prove to my wife that I couldn't support her. I told her I couldn't support her in a non-courthouse town, and that I could make a living in the cotton business, and I thought I'd do well in it because I loved it. But anyway, I went down there, and the first day in the office, I brought my day book. I kept, until 1971, I kept a day book of everything I did and every dollar I took in. And in preparation for this, I looked at it. And the first day in the office, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything for about a week. I had a sign about this big. It says, W. Jerry Flippin, attorney at law, and hung it up. It was a shingle indeed, with nobody in my family who were lawyers, non-courthouse town, no experience. Who wants to go to a lawyer and have experience? You can't get any experience until you get some practice. I was caught on the horns of a dilemma. So I stayed down there, and finally this man came in all with N.L. Meadows I'd known, and did a little work for him. And
what was that work you did for Mr. Meadows?
Well, I told that wrong. I had an account to collect. Mills Morris sent that to me because no other lawyer around, I think, would handle it. And he paid $10, and I got 12% of it. Then Mrs. Arnie Biggs came in. I filled out some civil service papers and charged her $5. And it was about like it, and then blank pages and blank pages and blank pages. And then we had a divorce case that created some interest in town, and Pope versus Pope. We got $50 for divorce cases, and the case had already been filed, and I filed an amendment to it, and my book told right here, and tried the case. I got $25 for trying the case, and I split the fee with the fellow who'd filed it. And I've got that right here in my book. So that was the first I produced. By the way, won the case. I'll have to kind of brag on myself, and I had results down here. We got custody of the children and all the property and some experience.
So your gross income for the first year, do you have any idea what
Yes, sir.
What was it?
I know exactly. I got it all totaled up. I got it in my mind, too. I know people, if anybody ever watches this thing, they won't believe it. It's $1,400. And out of that, I had to pay rent and telephone. It was practically nothing. I had saved up some money in the service. I didn't smoke, and I sold my cigarettes not through regular channels. And sent the money home, and I sent all my money home, and I'd haul coal for $1 a ton one summer for the county school system, and I had somewhere around $2,000, and we lived off that. Things were pretty cheap then. My apartment was brand new, brand spanking, lovely apartment. We were the first couple in it, $65 a month.
And how did that salary that you made the first year, how would that compare with other vocations and professions around Milan?
Well, we lost the only industry we had in town of any consequence was U.S. Rubber Company, and it closed. The Milan Arsenal at one time had thousands of people. They were down to 365. The Federal Housing Administration put the town on the blacklist and wouldn't make a federal insured loan. We were in the pits of economic recession. It wasn't as bad as it was when I was in high school. When I was 16 years old one summer, I worked at the Arsenal unloading boxcars, worked 40 hours a week, and made the minimum wage was 50 cents. And it was better than that, but nobody was having an easy time.
Tell us about your daily routine in 1954, of your work hours and your lunch and things like that.
Okay, well, Chancellor, I got some good advice from Chancellor John Gray. He took a liking to me and would talk to me. He'd point me when he could garden ad litem without making it look like he was overdoing it in my direction. And he told me, he said, you make yourself available. Says, you stay in your office. Says, you spend as much time, when you had to go to the courthouse, go. Get back quick and stay in your office. Says, always be available where people can reach you. And that was good advice. I'd go to the office at about 8 o'clock, and I'd stay till noon. I'd go home. I couldn't eat out. No more money than I was making. I'd go home, and we'd have lunch together. Sarah never worked anywhere other than the home. And we'd have a little light lunch, and I'd go back to the office and stay till 5 o'clock.
One particular day that you will recall well that, speaking of staying in the office,
Yeah.
the elements were against you one morning and you almost didn't go in the office. But what happened that day?
I told you about that way back when you first started practicing law. I passed this good advice on to you, and I gave you this example. It was pouring down rain one day. I got up at 8 o'clock and started town a little before 8. The post office opened at 8. And I didn't have hardly anything in the mail, advertisements maybe, but I wanted to look successful anyway. So I'd go to the post office, and it was raining, and I got wet from the knees down. I had on I think a raincoat, maybe an umbrella. I pulled up in front of my office, and see, I could park in front of my office. Wasn't much going on in town. And I just questioned whether I ought to get out of the car again. I was already just disgusted. I wanted to wait till the rain quit falling. But I went upstairs anyway. And I hadn't been upstairs 2 minutes. It must have been about 5 minutes after 8. And the telephone rang. And it was Spurgeon Jones calling me from Paris, Tennessee. And he said that he'd been involved in an automobile wreck, and his mother was with him, and she was very seriously injured. And could I come up there immediately? The man who had sideswiped him was from Ohio, and he didn't know anything about the long-arm statute, and he thought the man had to be sued or else he'd get outside the jurisdiction. I didn't know an awful lot about the long-arm statute myself, but I went to Paris, Tennessee, and while that man was still hanging around town, I got him sued. And it turned out they amputated his mother's arm as a result of injuries. And I settled that case, and for the policy limits. And that went a long way in keeping me in the practice. And I gave Chancellor John Gray, he's dead now, and thank you, Chancellor. You gave me that advice to be in the office and be available. I wouldn't have gotten that case. He'd have called somebody else.
But actually, your first case that you can recall trying was about a mule.
Oh, I'm sure there's some other lawyers around still practicing, but I see Gibson County had that old magistrate system. And if an offense, if it occurred out in the magistrate district in the county, you tried the case there. And Squire Crocker, T.B. Crocker, held court in his front yard. I remember it, I can see it now. All the neighbors had heard that there was going to be a trial, and they came up there and sat on a wagon bed under a catawba tree in the worm season. And we tried that case. It was over whether or not a mule was moon-eyed or whether his eyes were a little bit moony, and that was the difference. If it's a moon-eyed mule, he's blind. If it's a mule, his eyes are just a little moony, he can still see good enough to be a work animal. And we tried that case, and I've laughed about it. I participated in one trial in the Supreme Court of the United States, and the other trial I remember real well was out there at Squire T.B. Crockett's front yard under a catawba tree. And one was just as important as the other at the time. And when you're coming along with no practice hardly at all, every case is important.
I think I overlooked something in the questions. You described your grandparents and your parents, but your family, your wife and children.
Oh, my wife and children. Oh, yes, I married a fine lady from Nashville, Sarah Floyd. I met her on the Vanderbilt campus. She had just come back from Florida and had a good suntan, and still a nice-looking lady. And she was walking across the campus, and I was walking behind her. And Paul Kelly from Chattanooga, used to be from Jasper, called him Coon Kelly. He was coming toward me, and past her, I noticed they spoke. And he came by me, and we were classmates. And I said, Coon, I said, who is that? He said, you don't know her? I said, no, that's Sarah Floyd. That's W.O.'s sister. Well, he lived at the Beta House, and W.O. was president of the Betas. And I said, I want to meet her. And he said, sure. When you want to do it? I said, now. He's turned around, and we just followed her right to the bookstore, had a short conversation. Before it was over with, I had a telephone number, and I called her the next day. And we've been married 51 years.
And your sons?
Well, I got a junior, William Jerry Flippin Jr., and I got a son, Floyd Flippin, and he's in Humboldt. He's a lawyer. And some Houston Flippin, he's an environmental engineer, went to Vanderbilt also, took his master's there, and he's in Nashville practicing. And we were real fortunate, had 3 healthy boys, and she reminds me in 4 years. So that's quite a feat.
Your practice evolved from the magistrate's front yard in a catawba tree to the U.S. Supreme Court and cases as far away as Germany and Hawaii. How did that happen?
I say this, I'm one of the most fortunate country lawyers I know of. Harvey Aluminum won the contract to operate the Milan arsenal just as the Vietnam War opened up. Went from 365 people, and they came to my office and asked me if I'd represent them. And I was in the state senate at the time, and they wanted somebody with some governmental connections. So I agreed to represent them, and just said they didn't have the money in the budget, but they paid me when they could, and in the meanwhile they put me to work. And one long after that, they put me on retainer. But then I did some of everything for them. But then the shells they made, 1 in a million is the average as a premature. That is, a shell goes off in the barrel of the weapon rather than in the target area. We made 80 millimeter, 81 millimeter mortars, 155 millimeter shells, 105s, hand grenades, you name it. Well, during the war there, we had 9,000 people working out there and making ammunition 3 shifts a day, and some bad ones got through the inspection, and they blew up in the bore of the gun. I tried the first case for them and lucked out. I want to say that, just lucked out, and got a defense verdict. And then they held me in higher esteem than they should have, but I went along with it. They got sued in Honolulu. They got sued in Colorado, out to Denver, New York, Davenport, Iowa. Just where the accident happened, if in the States, if it happened overseas, they bring suit where the soldier lived. And I was in on all those cases. I got to try a case in Honolulu. It took Sarah. You know, she's the one who got me in this law practice to begin with. I paid her back. I put her down on Waikiki Beach, and I would go back and forth to the courthouse. And I was very fortunate indeed. And then ITT came to Milan, and they had 2,200 people working, and they hired me, and ITT made such a mess on an installation of central office equipment up in Alaska that they didn't want the home office to know how bad it was. So that I was on their payroll with a retainer anyway, and they sent me to try their lawsuit in Alaska. And I enjoyed that very much. It took me a while to find out. I was so complimented, but I was the only recourse they had. If they reported to the home office and they'd gotten a real high-powered lawyer, they'd had to confess local sins. They could use me and hide it, and that's exactly what they did. But those cases were interesting. I met some of the finest lawyers in the country, and I found it to be easier practice. More prominent that the lawyers are, the more agreeable they are, and you get down to just the ultimate facts in the case, and I enjoyed that all. That was a long story, but people still wonder how in the world that I was involved in those cases all across the country. Little old country lawyer from Milan, Tennessee, and I think I've explained it, that one time I lucked out and they thought I was pretty good, and I wasn't all that good, but they thought so.
Excuse me.
That's all.
Some of the best trial lawyers around here were hired on, as you would say, by the railroads.
Yeah.
Mike Cody in Memphis, and Tom Elam in Union City, and some other ones that you got to work with. How did that happen?
Well, it got to kind of happen this way. The L&N Railroad comes through Milan, and the IC comes through Milan. And back in those days, there were a lot of crossing cases. I don't know why there's not as many today, with putting up those flashing lights. Didn't have them then. And I really think Mr. Lewis Allen had something to do with it. He was the executive secretary of the Tennessee Railroad Association, a renowned lobbyist in Nashville, and I was in the legislature at the time. I went to the legislature pretty early in my career. I went to the House the second year of my law practice. I ran for the State House of Representatives and was elected, and I knew Mr. Allen. And he might have been instrumental in this. He didn't take any credit for it. And I represented the L&N in a pretty important case right here in Milan. And at a crossing, and I won it. And next thing I know, they asked me if I would handle more of their work, and I told them I would. And then Illinois Central, I really don't know how that got started, but I ended up representing them. And I tried quite a few crossing cases, and I enjoyed it. Once again, met some fine lawyers, especially those representing the plaintiff. Boy, they were good. They were coming out of East Tennessee, coming over into West Tennessee, trying this case. They were hooked up with the Brotherhood or some way or another. They had a real lead into these cases.
Okay.
How are we standing time-wise?
You had one professor at Vanderbilt Law School in particular that you remember.
Oh, Lord, have mercy, yes. He was named Eddie Morgan. He had come down from Harvard. They had a mandatory retirement age at Harvard, and he came in to teach evidence. And he was a modern-day Wigmore. He had written the restatement of evidences, I believe. They say the man was brilliant. He's a little bitty short fella, but I tell you what, I couldn't learn anything from that man hardly. I was scared to death. And I got a C in that course. And if I had gotten an A from everything else, it wouldn't mean any more to me. I ran outside the law school building and just fell on the ground. I was so relieved. But he was he could write tremendously, but I never thought he was a very good teacher. And consequently, I've always thought that the weakness in my law practice was perhaps the rule of evidence, really. I just had difficulty, and I couldn't get on the same wavelength with Edmund Morgan.
All right. Back to your law practice, there's, in any lawyer's career, there's cases that stand out that they'll always remember. and certainly in your case. One case that was quite notable around here was a very unfortunate industrial accident involving two fellows, Schoonover and Cale, and you were involved in that case. Tell us about it.
Yes, I'd known the Schoonover family all my life. I'd gone to, it's a big family, and I'd gone to school with Wilma and Lord of mercy, I knew them all, Harville and the whole bunch, and had a terrible explosion out here at the Fomex plant. It was, at the time, it was Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, I believe. And he had 80% third-degree burns over his body, and Cale had 40% over his body. Burned to a crisp, and Schoonover lived over a month every day begging him to let him die because it was so painful. He was a burned son of Birmingham. But anyway, I filed that lawsuit, and I had to file it against Emerson Electric, Mobil Oil. I couldn't file it against for Firestone because we'd already gotten the workers' compensation benefits from them. And on the other side of the case was the best lawyers in West Tennessee, Ed Bryant, Sid Spraggins, and Al Harvey. And we took some statements early on in the case. At that point in time, my son Floyd was in Al Harvey's law firm in Memphis. And Al Harvey told me, he said, something I want you to know. He says, we built a Chinese wall around Floyd, and says, that doesn't, because he's your son, and said he will have no knowledge about this case whatsoever. So we started into it. And I could see that a lot of law involved in that case, tremendous amount of law involved. And I had a classmate who had been very successful in product liability cases. I keep up with who's doing what sort around the country, people I went to school with. And that's Jack Madden in Nashville and his partner Malcolm McCune. And I went to Nashville and I associated Jack Madden and McCune. It's the smartest thing that I ever did. Well, they wouldn't offer us a dime in that case, and we went to trial after taking depositions all over the country. They tried to outspend us. That's one thing they tried to do. Darn, I wouldn't let that happen. We had of our own money, we had $80,000 of our own money. Our clients couldn't put up anything for hiring these experts, and of course we obligated to try to collect from them and do it ethically, you know, but we did what we had to do. That trial went on and on and on. After 3 weeks into the trial, they never offered a penny. And then we got a real break in the trial. Some of the evidence that they were relying on, the experts, they were so sure that they had all of the physical facts right, but they made one mistake, and we caught them at it. And that case went from 0 to 7 figures. And of course, it's the most money that I ever brought in on a case. And I give Malcolm McCune and Jack Madden pulled my chestnuts out of the fire, so to speak. I probably wouldn't have won. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have won a case without them, and it was very satisfying with the funds they put Schoonover's daughter through college, and she has done fantastically well. She is a compliance officer of the West Tennessee Healthcare Company. She's working on her doctorate in medical law. It's a beautiful story. We did well for Cale, and it answered all of his problems. He lived. Schoonover died. But that was the most. I walked the. We set up headquarters over at Jackson at the Old English Inn. We had paralegals, we had secretaries, we had expert witnesses, and paying them $1,000 a day, the experts, and that clock running. And that's a case where I got to testify. Ed Bryant and I agreed to something about when I hired an expert, and Mobile Oil Company lawyer didn't believe me, and he wanted to question me. He wanted Ed Bryant to. Ed Bryant wouldn't do it. Ed Bryant said, pardon me for bragging a little bit, but he said if Jerry Flippin says that's the day he hired him, that's the day he hired him, and said in his paperwork says that's when he hired him. This man changed his opinion 180 degrees. And the question was, did he change it after I hired him or before? Well, I took the witness stand. And that lawyer from Mobile Oil Company, by the time he got through questioning me, and he got crossways with Judge Horton, and it was just awful for them, and it just changed the complexion of the whole case. And I'm not going to say Al Harvey is a fine lawyer, Sid Spraggins, fine lawyer, Ed Bryant's fine lawyer. And by the way, Ed's coming back to the law practice. What lost that case? It wasn't those lawyers. It was that lawyer from Mobile Oil Company who decided he's going to get in the case and try to do something. He made a mess of it.
So about trial lawyers, what do you think when you hear politicians running down trial lawyers?
Well, ugly jokes about lawyers. I listened to them, and I just quit for a while saying anything. I thought maybe it's something just going like these Polish jokes that went around, and it would soon go away, but it doesn't. And the finest men I know are lawyers. Most honest men I know are lawyers, and most trustworthy men I know are lawyers. And I don't like for people to demean us, and I've started getting up on my hind legs about it. And sometimes the doctors, they get on us, and I just come to our rescue. And I don't know if it's a question you had in mind. Did that include doctors as well?
No, sir.
All right, I got a good story about that.
Well, tell us about that. You wound up on the beach one time.
Well, yes,
with a
I was
family
down
full of doctors.
I was down in Florida, and take my family down there every May, take all of them, 10 of us, grandchildren and all. And I was down on the beach, and you know how you talk to people, and they found out that I was a lawyer, and found out he was an orthopedic surgeon. We were having a conversation. He kind of told a lawyer joke that wasn't too nice, and next thing you know, he called his buddies over. That's 3-on-1. And they said some more things, and you know, kind of laughing around about it. And I said, I said, well, let me tell you something. I said, you through with your jokes, and you won't tell any more? And I said it in a nice, friendly way. He said, oh, no, I guess. I said, well, let me tell you something. I said, and I had just learned this. I said, lawyers have been mighty important folks in this country. I said, one of the lawyers of this country were drafting the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution of the United States, the most revered documents in the world, stood the test of time. While that was all taking place, your crowd was putting leeches on George Washington. And that, they had no comeback. Of course, I just had to say it.
Good. You, from the Schoonover case to, first under the Catawba Treaty, the U.S. Supreme Court, to the Schoonover case to Hawaii and Germany, but then back to Greenfield, Tennessee, and Chief Alton Bryant. What was his misfortune?
Well, you can ask Judge David Hayes. He talks about that every time he sees me. He said, we had a case up there where, by the way, Alton Bryant was town marshal up there, chief of the police, and he was kin to Zach and Josephus. Well, there was a fellow up there, reputation wasn't too good, and he and his wife were separated, but they were out together, which that happens, you know. And this man had had a run-in with Mr. Bryant, and Mr. Bryant had a warrant for him, some sort, I think, and he went out there where he was in a car with his wife. It was his wife's car, but her ex-husband was behind the wheel, and the engine was running. I don't know whether they had the air conditioner on or the heater on, I don't know what, but when the altitude came up, they had the window down about that far. In the old days, when they put you under arrest, they put the hand on you. You know, you were under arrest. That was sort of done where it could be done. So Mr. Bryant reached his hand in, the window cracked open, and put his hand on who turned out later to be my client. And my client said he was scared of him, thought he was going to do him some violence, and he pushed the button, and the window ran up, and he caught his arm and then he put his foot on the accelerator and went down Highway 45 dragging him. It was pretty bad. It ruptured the disc, and he had to have surgery and all this and that, and he sued. Well, my client's conduct wasn't too acceptable, but I had to make some kind of issue, so I tried Alton Bryant. I always heard that. I learned that from somebody told me about Seth Walker. He used to be John Hooker's law partner. He tried to get John Gray was in law practice. He said if your facts against you and the law against you, he said, try the judge, try anybody that you can. So anyway, I tried Alton, and I learned that he had sprayed some mace at one of the local nightclubs, and had just made himself quite obnoxious in the community and put folks under arrest that shouldn't have been, and just pretty bad. And my client's father, he'd gotten into it with him. Well, we found out that he had this guy up there named Wendell Swindle, and he had been down at the Stardust place. And Alton had gone in there and over something, little old minor something. He'd sprayed him right good. And Eddie Chandler was in that case with a civil rights action. It was all combined. It was just the biggest conglomeration of issues you ever saw. And all at once, I thought about it, and I accused Alton Bryant you sprayed Wendell Swindle in the face with mace at the Stardust place. I said, you know, that makes a good country song. So I kind of sung that to the jury a few times. And it would make a good song. It all rhymed right good, and they got to laughing about it. And next thing you know, when the trial was over, they had his evidence over, went back in the jury room, stayed about 2 minutes, came back and acquitted him. And Tate Hayes says if I hadn't sung that song to the jury, that he had his verdict won. We had a lot of fun about that. And you know, one thing about the practice of law, I always say that I don't care how serious a case is, every now and then you got to have some humor. If you don't, the darn stress will just blow you away. And most every time, I found some humor. I tried a case up in Henry County one time where some men from Milan got hit head-on by a woman, husband owned a Buick dealership. And he kept on, I put my client on, and they'd gone out, they were fishermen, they were retired. One was Mr. Ben Jordan and Archie Hatchett, and they got tired of paying for minnows, you know, these little fish you use for bait. So they got they seined a pond or two and got these little bitty perch and every little fish they could, and they put them in large stands, and they put them in the back seat of the car. And they was in the water. The large stands were about full of water, had all this full of fish, had hundreds of fish, and she hit them head on. Well, what Mr. Hatchett had him on the witness stand, or Mr. Jordan, and I asked him what the name was, and they jumped way out ahead of me and said, oh, she hit us head on. I said, wait a minute. I said, we got to take this thing step at a time. I said, when you got up there to the road, you turn to the right, Yeah, like you're going to Big Sandy. I said, one step at a time. I said, what happened next? He said, we got in the right lane. I said, what happened next? I said, she came across the center line. I said, what happened next? He said, I was baptized with 2,500 minnows. All that stuff in the back seat, went to the front, baptized them, and then everybody got to laughing about that. And then when they got to the hospital, I put the nurse on, and she was in the emergency room. And I did her the same way. What happened next? You know, you take this step at a time. And she said, I laid him out, had him laid out up there on the table, and said I was worried about broken bones, and said I took some scissors and said I cut a shirt off of him. What happened next? She said, we had to quit. I know why. She said that hundreds of fish came out of his shirt, and they were all over the floor of the operating room. Well, the jury got to laughing again. We had to call 2 recesses to get order in the courtroom. And you remember those things. Whether it had anything to do with the outcome of the trial or not, we did win the case and got a pretty fair country judgment for them. But there are things like that I remember more about the practice of law than those nights of anguish and hurting and stress and just awful nights when you got some case underway. You always remember what gave you relief.
Your associate was once booked to depose Dixie Carter and Hal Holbrook in a civil case, but somehow or another a conflict arose, and you got the difficult job.
Well, it was during duck hunting season, and this gentleman interviewing me right here was the one. What happened is that Dixie Carter and Hal Holbrook came back to her hometown of McElmoyville to remodel their old family home and have a way to kind of get away from the media and everything. So we represent, our law firm did, A1 Lumber Company, and they furnished the materials. But the contractor was behind with some other jobs, and he took Peter's money and paid Paul, and didn't pay for the material. So we put a lien on the house and filed a lawsuit to enforce the lien against Miss Dixie Carter, and Hal Holbrook came down with her. The funny thing about it is I was trying that lawsuit just before that out in California. In San Diego, I tried a pretty long time case out there. And that's where I took the hand grenades in the U.S. District Court that you were talking about at some little break we had here. And anyway, coming back, I had a right smart hair on at that time. And I had a beard, and the stewardess on the airplane kept talking to each other and looking at me, and they thought I was Hal Holbrook. Came back then, I finally said, I tell you why, you want to know why we kept looking at you? I said, no, but obvious to me. She said, we finally decided you weren't Hal Holbrook. So anyway, I told that to my secretary, and she was from Carroll County, and she told D.D. Maddox, and he represented Dixie Carter, and Dixie Carter told Hal Holbrook. Now, during that duck hunting season, I was down in my duck blind, and I was asked to take her deposition because the lawyer handling the A1 Lumber Company case versus Dixie Carter had a conflict. So I agreed to take a deposition if I could come straight from the duck blind. Well, I had on my hunting clothes, and I took the hunting clothes off, had a pair of khaki pants, and a red and black checkered shirt, and I go in there at D.D. Maddox's office to take the deposition. Hal Holbrook comes in, and he's up there trying to take it easy in a little old town of 700, 500 people. He came in with a pair of khaki pants on and a black and red checkered shirt, which looked like we had dressed for it, identical. And so I got to take his deposition. I took his too because he was in on the remodeling, and I took Dixie Carter's deposition. She's a lovely girl. I'd known her brother, Hal Carter. I'd served in the legislature with him. And it was a very enjoyable situation, but we got lots of laughs out of Hal Holbrook now. And of course, he does a thing on lawyers, you know. He acts like he's Mark Twain. And of course, he gave me that act up there at the time. But it was a very enjoyable situation.
How can you settle 2,600 wage discrimination cases at one time? How can you handle that many?
Well, we go back to the Milan Arsenal. We had 2,500 women out there. And historically, at industries, especially in the South, they paid women less money for appreciably the same work. And then we had that wage differential, they called it. And I got a call from Harvey Aluminum, asked me, it said, we've been cited by the federal government because we pay 15 cents per hour wage differential between male and female. Well, I looked at it, and then what they'd done, they used to just call it men and women. And it's 15 cents per hour difference in the wages. So what they did when the law changed, and you're not supposed to do a thing like that, they just called it heavy labor group and light labor group. But there were some men in the heavy labor group who had been operated on for ruptured disc, and they were put to light duty. They were doing no more than the women. And there were some women who were good and strong, and they were doing work heavy. It was contaminated, the classification was. Well, they said, have you ever handled a case like this before? And I said, no, not really. They said, well, we're going to send you out to California to a quick school. So I went out there to the big law firm. I was thinking about that guy's name the other day. They're big lawyers. And I got there, I called from the airport, and they said, well, catch a cab and come on down, and said, we're having a party. I said, I got out there, you know who they're having a party for? Oh my goodness, I went to something like a city club. All of the editors of the law reviews of the law schools west of the Mississippi, I never saw so many. They were courting these students to hire them. Well, anyway, that thing was over with, and I got in there, and this guy named Steve, somebody, fine, younger than I was. He told me, he listened to me, and he says, oh, we did some more discussion of the case and saw what the records I had. And he said, let me tell you what I think you ought to do. I think you ought to go back and eliminate the wage differential. I said, we got a back wage problem. And I said, I don't want to eliminate the wage differential. I said, let's do it all at one time. I lose my leverage. He says, no. He said, you go back and admit that you're wrong. And just say, you've convinced me. You convinced me that my client's wrong. And tell them that day that you have eliminated the wage differential of the 15 cents and that all the females henceforth making the same as the males, even though they're in different labor groups, light labor and heavy labor. I said, man, we got a back wage problem. I said, let's try to put a cap on that. Let's do something in negotiation. He said, aren't you from the South? I said, yeah. He said, don't y'all have revivals down there in the churches? I said, yeah. Do you have evangelists to come around? I said, oh, yeah. He said, let me tell you, an evangelist is only interested in converting you. They're not as much interested in your past sins. He said, you go up there and let them convert you to their way of thinking and tell them they've done so, and said you'll find out they'll be very light on you about your past sins. And they'll almost forget it. Well, man, I went back and I told the plant manager what my strategy is going to be. He couldn't believe it either. Everything my dad had ever taught me about horse trading went out the window. I went up there to the Labor Department. I kind of said, this is the craziest thing I ever did. And I went in there and I said, I called them all in, all those that worked on the case. They had a bunch of them. I said, I've come up here to tell you that you folks have won me over. And I have convinced my company they're wrong. And as of this morning, when I was driving up here, I said, every female making the same as every male in the production group. I said, we have eliminated the wage differential. Man, they congratulated me, shook my hand, kind of welcomed me into the brotherhood, or what do you want to call it. And I sat there a while, and they smiled, drunk coffee together, and I said, but we got that issue of the wage differential. They said, well, you know, we'll kind of help you on that. And they found out how much extra money we had that we was going to spend on some maintenance. They didn't have to spend it. And they took about 10 or 15 cents on the dollar maybe, and helped me the next payday to in line to have every employee to sign a release and a receipt. And that horrible wage differential case went away. And that is something that I've passed on to some of the other lawyers about negotiation with the government.
Tell us about security at the federal courthouse in San Diego.
Oh, that goes back to that case over there. This had to do with hand grenades. And the issue was whether or not this recruit at Paris Landing, no, it wasn't at Paris Landing, excuse me. This was out in San Diego, Camp Pendleton, I believe it was, had taken a grenade, and whether or not he had, you know, in a training exercise, whether or not he had released the grenade. It's a little handle on the side of it, and that starts the time ticking. And you better turn that thing loose, because I think you've got something less, you got 7 seconds, I believe. Or whether or not it had slipped in his hand, and he didn't know that it had released the firing pin. So I took the grenades out there. That's called milking a grenade, as distinguished from putting it in a firing position. Well, I had a tape recorder in my pocket, and we started through the government officials at the front door. They just started that. And they got all upset because the judge upstairs, that we were going to his court, he had a rule against anybody bringing a tape recorder in the courtroom, because he didn't want to, he said something every now and then he didn't want to have a record of, I suppose. So they got all upset about my tape recorder, and while they're doing that, I just put my briefcase over there on that belt-like thing. And I didn't, if they'd have questioned me about it, sure, I had 6 hand grenades in that thing. But it just went right through that machine as pretty as you ever saw. And on the other side, I was running a little late anyway, so I just walked on through after I gave him my tape recorder and got that briefcase, went upstairs, and we appeared before the magistrate. That's who we first appeared before. And I said, I brought something out here that I want to explain to you about this hand grenade. We're trying to settle a case. It was a settlement conference, what it was. And I was going to show him how easy it is. Nothing wrong with the grenade, he just didn't handle it right. And I was prepared to show him. I'd been practicing with it. And I laid down 6 hand grenades, and he asked me how I got through that downstairs. I said, put that briefcase on the belt like everybody else, and just came through. He couldn't believe it. I don't know whether they fired them all or not, but I understand they had a terrible commotion down there in front of the courthouse about it. But the grenades, they stayed in the courtroom.
You mentioned lawyers and the Constitution, and the legal profession led you into politics, or did it?
It did. I had been practicing law about a year, really not quite a year. And I knew a good many people that I'd met at the Cotton Gin, and I grew up here. But Gibson County had, at that time, had about 60,000 people. And I was interested in government. I always was. So I ran for the legislature. And I went to the House of Representatives in 1954. And I served there, and then when I got to be 30 years old, or let me get that thing right, 31 years old, the constitutional limit was age 30, our state senator didn't seek re-election, and I ran for the Senate, and I served 3 terms there. And in between, we were right in the middle of reapportionment, and I was a defendant in the the landmark case of Baker versus Carr. I got real interested in Senator Dirksen, who was Howard Baker's father-in-law, had an amendment before the United States Congress to allow one half of a state legislature to be based on population, just like it is in Washington, and the other half to be based on population. One on population, one on geography. Just like it is in the United States Senate. Every state's got 2 senators, regardless of size. And the House of Representatives is based on population. It made sense to me. So I pursued that. And in order to further pursue it, I ran for the Constitutional Convention. And we got up there to the Constitutional Convention. That was the main thing on the agenda. But the Dirksen Amendment failed in Congress. And when the Dirksen Amendment failed in Congress, that took all the air out of my tires. And we were not able to do anything but debate both houses on population. When I was in the Senate, I was very fortunate. The Speaker of the Senate had been Speaker of the House, and that was Jim Bomar. And he came to me, and the Governor Frank Clement came to me and asked me if I'd be administrative floor leader. And then they asked me if I'd be majority leader of the Democratic caucus, and I agreed to do both of those. And I served in that capacity alongside of Jared Maddox, and I learned an awful lot. I ended up being on the Dave Garroway show. That was the older folks who remember that. Early in the morning, it's like the Today Show, I guess. But I didn't argue about reapportionment. What they had me up there for was about the monkey trial. Tennessee's got that monkey law in the books, and every session of the legislature, that thing would all come up. And I had a speech impediment. I had mentioned this so far, but when I first started practicing law, it was real bad. And some folks didn't think I ought to practice law because of my speech. But it grew better with self-confidence more than anything else. But some folks thought I'd get on that national television show and embarrass the state, because I was debating the evolution law on the Tennessee books with Dr. Basil Barrett Baxter, BBB, from David Lipscomb, and Senator Carter Patton from Chattanooga. We all had different ideas about it. And I think some of my friends, they tried to stop it because they thought that under the pressure of that program that my speech would be very poor. But it didn't. Old Dave Garroway sat on that stool, and he had a way of relaxing you, and I got along fine with it. I owed a lot to the state legislature. It matured me in a way that I couldn't have maturity. 5 terms in the legislature gonna make you better or make you worse.
And you were elected as a Democrat, is that right?
That's right, sir.
Did you ever share the stage with Harry Truman?
Yeah. Harry Truman came down here to Gibson County to speak in the presidential campaign, and it wasn't his campaign. Who was nominee at the time? I'm trying to think who it was.
Adlai Stevenson? Adlai
Stevenson, I do believe it was. Yes, it was. And run against Eisenhower, and Eisenhower was advocating the Dixon Yates situation to take to TVA and privatize it. Something funny kind of happened over there that people still kid me about it. Governor Gordon Brown and his sister married my daddy's uncle, and they lived across the street from us. And Governor Brown and he came down with Harry Truman, and we got there a little early, waiting on somebody else, and President Truman came up on the scene and introduced me, and I sat there right beside President Truman, I believe it was, and they invited me on the stage because I was a local elected member of the legislature. They always do that. And he was the most pleasant man I ever saw. He was like an old shoe, and he did have old shoes. He wore shoes like my grandfather Stewart did. It had about 9 holes in them, and they were out of kangaroo. And we had a good time. So when they introduced us one at a time on the front row up there, the Milan band was going to furnish the music to play the national anthem or some song, some patriotic song. And they were right by the microphone up front. So they introduced, and I had nothing to do with this. And when they introduced the folks on the stand, the crowd would give them a clap. And the band was just right up close to the microphone. And they introduced ex-President Harry Truman and Governor Brown. They gave him a decent clap in the crowd. And when they introduced me, every member of the band clapped their hands and hooped and hollered, "Get on!" They said, "I got a bigger applause than Harry Truman." And we had a lot of fun about that.
One morning, first of all, what was your sometimes mode of transportation from here to the legislature?
When I was in the house, we didn't have but one car in the family, and the highway patrol would run like the Pony Express. They'd pick me up in Milan, and they'd take me to Huntington, and the man running up and down the highway, his area, they just Pony Express me on up. And
to the legislature?
To the legislature, and come back home kind of the same way, catch a ride with somebody. And then I got busy. My law practice, it got to blooming pretty good when I was in the Senate. And I was practicing by myself. First 16 years I did. And something had to give. So I bought I hired Lawrence Browning, taught folks how to fly and ran a private plane service. And I had to try a lawsuit in Brownsville, Tennessee that morning. There was one I could not afford to continue. And I had to be in the legislature when it opened up right after lunch. And I hired him to fly me. We wasn't making but $15 a day, including expenses. I remember that. But I hired him to take me to try my lawsuit down in Brownsville, and then to fly me to Nashville to a private strip right down there by the Bordeaux, by the Cumberland River. I can't think the name of it, Cumberland Field. So anyway, we flying along there. It was I was sitting beside him up front. It was a 4-place plane. He said, "You want to fly this thing?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Now you keep a nose on the horizon." And he told me a little thing. And Lawrence was on that 1943 football team. So we were good friends. And I was flying. And thought occurred to me. I said, what it cost to teach me how to fly? He told me. I said, what it cost to buy an airplane like this? He told me what I could buy it for. I said, consider this lesson number 1. He told me how many hours it'd take to fly, about 8 to solo. So he found it for me, airplane, up at Shelbyville, Tennessee. It had 400 hours on it, and I bought it. So I got to flying back and forth to the Senate.
And one particular morning, you were in the state Senate, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And there was an important bill to be acted on that morning?
Yes, it was. And it's one I'm sitting here right now. I had to be there. One reason that I'm not flying anymore is that I was one of these guys that had to fly regardless of the weather. I was not instrument rated. And I had to be in Nashville. I thought the world would come to an end if I didn't get there. So I got up that morning, and fog was low. And I ended up taking off. I said, well, by the time I get to Nashville, it'll burn off at early morning fog. Well, I got to Nashville, and all I could see was about one floor of the L&C tower. I could see Channel 4 antenna, and I could see the smokestack of the Nashville glass plant. I remember, and I had flown in there so much that I could I could fly in an hour. In an hour, I'd be in Nashville, and didn't have the interstate then. It took a good while to go through all these towns. So I estimated where the airport was, and I put the nose down the plane, and I went through stuff. It looked like shaving cream, and I broke out at about 300 feet, right over a golf course, instead of the landing strip. I think there's some folks, I've heard there's some folks that morning playing golf had to go drink something for the nerves. But I knew I'd missed the landing strip about 100 yards, so I gave it throttle and got over there, and I got on the end of the runway and I landed. And they asked me, they ran out there and said, "Where in the world did you come from? How did you find this airstrip? The main airport in Nashville closed." I said, "Oh, it's simple." I said, I got down real low and I followed the Cumberland River, and when I flew under the Bordeaux Bridge, I took the first right. And that didn't happen. But anyway, it made a good story, and they told it all over airplane pilots. I didn't do it, though.
Tell us how your law practice and your law firm has changed over the years as far as solo practice and partners and so forth.
Well, I was by myself for 16 years, and I should have gotten some help before then. I darn near killed myself. And I had to leave the legislature. It just, no way I wasn't going to be a professional politician. I knew that. I wasn't going to be a professional office holder, and I had to pick some time to leave. But what really excavated the situation and hurt it on, and my wife was sick and tired of raising 3 boys by herself. So she, in my absence, she nominated me as the president of the Little League. And if you're president of the Little League in the summertime, when you be running for re-election, you have to do everything. If the umpire don't show up, you get behind home plate. If the folks in the concession stand don't show up, you flip hamburgers. So that ended my political career, and so I got home. Well, the law practice really grew and grew, and I needed help, but I didn't want to move anybody to Milan, Tennessee, and have them not like it. I've seen that happen. And so I just kept practicing by myself and working 60 hours a week, pretty well standard. Go back at night after dinner and that sort of thing. And I found a boy from my hometown that was got out of Vanderbilt, and he was a clerk on Supreme Court. And in 1970, made an offer to Fred Collins, who at the time was a clerk in judge of the Supreme Court. Fred had a great knowledge of the law and very intelligent fellow, and this was his hometown, so I brought Fred in. A little while after that, and I practiced, continued to grow, and a little while after that, I made that overture to Ben Huey, who was a Milan boy. He'd been to Vietnam 2 times as a Marine Corps officer. Highly respected and highly liked in town, and so I put the 3 of us. And after a short while, they developed a following of their own, and I still worked to death and had to apologize to ask them to help me. And then a fella came into my office, and I didn't even know he was in law school. And he said, would you, he introduced himself, and I said, "You Wilma's son?" And it was James Webb, the fellow interviewing me. And he said, "Mr. Flippin," he said, "I've just taken the bar exam and I'm worried to death." He said, "I'm married," and says, my wife is helping to look after a sick aunt, and I'm about to lose my mind." Said, "If you will just let me come in here and find something me to do. Said, you don't have to pay me much. He said, I got to have something to do. I'm just about to go crazy worrying about things. So I had a case at the time. It was a pretty serious case. This man had fallen inside of a water tower inside the tank, and had injured himself real badly. And I said, well, here's a file on this. I said, just go back and look over this file and prepare me a memorandum of the law and everything. And it didn't have we failed to file the renewal certificate with the Department of Labor. Could turn it into a common law case. It was just bad. Well, he took that file, was gone about a day, and the librarian came back with what I thought was a brilliant thing. And by the way, I used and didn't depart from it. I used that in trying the lawsuit. The case went to the Supreme Court, I believe. I used that in Supreme Court, and it won both trials. So I was fishing down, and he was going to Chattanooga to be interviewed for a job. He passed the bar, and he was still hanging around my office. And the other lawyer weren't too sure we were positioned to hire lawyer number 4, once again in a non-courthouse town. So I was fishing on Reelfoot Lake by myself. And got to thinking about it and how much help he'd been to me, and I just started up my outboard motor and went to the bank and had a pay telephone. And I didn't know where he was in Chattanooga, but his sister lived in Jasper. And I called her. I said, find him and tell him not to listen to a thing in the world they say to you in Chattanooga. You need to be back here 7 miles from your hometown. And I said, come and see me. And so we got another lawyer, and helped me tremendously. I know a lot of cases I would not have won without the help of James Webb.
Excuse me. Thank you. How has the technology changed from the time of the rotary? What did you start with? A rotary dial phone and a royal typewriter?
I sure did. We had old-timey, didn't have that. Pick up the phone and tell the operator the number. I still remember some of them.
So to complete a call when you started practicing
You pick up the phone and say, I want 254, that was my house. And had party lines and everything else. And then they finally modernized the phone system. Now we got all this stuff, computers and fax machines and copy machines, and Lord have mercy, all the copies used to have to be made with carbon paper. It was terrible.
Did you start with a good royal typewriter?
I sure did, and paid $65 for it. And I didn't have a secretary for the first year. I worked at night, typed deeds, pleadings, just whatever. And I finally got a secretary for 2 days a week. I got a full-time secretary for $40 a week. I do remember that. And everything was relative. But, oh gosh, in my office down there now, great gracious. Email, all that stuff. All the research now done by computer.
How many law books did you start a practice with, and what were they?
Well, the only one I needed was the mattress manual, I reckon. But history of a lawsuit and all that sort of thing, and the reports and the code. I bought it from Archie Neal. He was a used book salesman. I had about a $700-800 library, and a pretty nice one, about what everybody else had. Finally got ALR, and then that grew from that.
The first board of professional responsibility for the state of Tennessee. How were you involved in that?
I got a telephone call from Justice Ross Dyer. I thought a lot of him. He was from Halls, Tennessee, and he says, I want to point you to the Board of Professional Responsibility. And it sounded pretty important. I said, how much time would it take? He said, oh, not much. And so I agreed, and they put an order down, and we had somebody from by each congressional district. I believe that's how we did it. And I was given a whole bunch of counties in West Tennessee. We had no staff. We had Miss Mary Woodruff would meet with us when we had a meeting. And they kind of pretty well told us when complaints came in that we would investigate them and would do what we thought was right about it. And that just is pretty loose at that time. And so I served 2 terms.
And then later, you served another stint on the board, did you not?
Yes, it got kind of, more sophisticated. They got some investigators, and they got some lawyers. I got Lance Bracey to head the thing up, and then I continued on. I served 2 terms under the old system and then 2 terms under the new system, and I learned an awful lot. I learned a lot of stuff not to do and things to do to keep from having a malpractice suit filed against you, for sure. I never had one of those filed against me, and I enjoyed it very much. We wrote some very good opinions. Ed Townsend and I wrote one opinion called a furor, and that was about, that had to do that when an insurance company hired a lawyer, and we represented quite a few insurance companies over the years. I picked up quite a few of those accounts, that you're the lawyer for the insured, not the insurer. And that because they try to control you. Insurance company don't want you to do certain things because it's expensive. But you got to give a good defense to that man who sued beyond the policy limits. And we wrote some opinions like that, wrote one about conflicts of interest where city attorneys and county attorneys couldn't take the defense on indigent cases, and the Supreme Court had urged us to not look at practicality, but look at what's really right about things and conflicts, and we did various, but they disagreed with us on that one, which kind of disappointed me. But anyway, it was a good experience. So I did our own investigations, and I remember we didn't know much. I didn't. I remember one time I went to a lawyer's office. I'm not going to say exactly where, but close to Mississippi River. And he let his practice get in terrible shape through alcoholism. You know, it's awful. Statute of limitations running, and always this awful. And I went over there, and I knew of him, didn't know him, knew of him. And I sat down and talked to him all the complaints, and I never will get it as long as I live. He just he said, I can't disagree. That day he was sober. And he walked over there to the wall, and he had his law license in a frame. Took his law license off the wall. Either he did or I did. I'd rather think he did, and handed him to me. And I just went to Nashville with he was still in the frame.
What'd you do with his law license?
Turned over to turned it over to Justice Ross Dyer. He was the man that got me into this, and let him handle it.
Is that called surrendering your license?
He surrendered his license to practice. That had to be called that. That's right.